Mount Rainier, otherwise known as Tahoma, is a striking stratovolcano, which notably is also the highest peak within the state of Washington, standing at a height of 14,410 feet at its summit. Now, as I discussed in a video I released a few weeks ago that detailed the disastrous Evergreen State College expedition, which ultimately failed in their attempt to summit the peak, within the mountaineering community, Mount Rainier is nearly unparalleled in its overall popularity amongst mountaineers, as since 1950, approximately 500,000 mountaineers have successfully reached its summit, and the peak regularly hosts over 10,000 summit hopefuls seeking to reach the top annually. As I also mentioned in the aforementioned video, and is also evidenced by the high number of annual summit hopefuls, an ascent of Mount Rainier is considered to be a relatively easy, beginner-friendly ascent, which rates on the unofficial Morbid Midnight Mountain difficulty scale as easy, but definitely not a hike, and would land somewhere between Kings Peak and Denali, difficulty-wise. Now, while only sporting an appropriately paltry 0.1% death to successful summit ratio, the sheer number of climbers that flock to Mount Rainier annually means that, judged only by the sheer number of deaths that have occurred on its slopes, Mount Rainier ranks amongst the most deadly peaks on the planet, as nearly 500 people have lost their lives on its slopes throughout the years. However, not all of the people who have unfortunately perished on Mount Rainier's slopes are mountaineers seeking to reach the summit, and actually 2 such individuals would in fact perish after accidentally reaching Mount Rainier's summit with no climbing gear, no previous mountaineering experience whatsoever, and with no actual intention of reaching it at all. At around 6 p.m. on the evening of January 20th, 1990, a duo consisting of a 53-year-old man, simply identified in the incident reports as RM, and a 47-year-old man, similarly identified as simply RB, approached Mount Rainier aboard a Piper PA-18 Super Cub airplane, and the duo decided that they'd attempt to catch a scenic view of Mount Rainier's summit and volcanic crater by flying over the mountain. However, as the 2 men continued to approach Mount Rainier, they soon realized in horror that the small plane lacked the power to actually ascend high enough to properly clear the peak, and, in a cruel twist of fate, the plane slammed into the summit crater, instantly killing 53-year-old RM on impact. However, 47-year-old RB would manage to survive the crash and subsequently managed to free himself from the interior of the plane and made his way away from the smoldering wreckage of the Piper Super Cub. However, as he fled away from the wreckage, he would seemingly notice that, despite distancing himself from the burning wreckage of the plane, he was growing increasingly warmer, so much so in fact that he then opted to remove his jacket, which left him wearing only a t-shirt on his upper torso. After it slammed into the summit crater, the Super Cub's emergency locator beacon activated, and the plane's location was soon thereafter picked up by Seattle air traffic controllers, who would pass the information on to local rescue officials, who subsequently organized a rescue party. However, with the daylight hours long faded by the time they could put one together, the rescue efforts would be delayed until the following morning. The following morning, on January 21st, 1990, 4 park rangers loaded aboard a Chinook helicopter, which transported them to the summit crater to inspect the site of the crash. Upon their initial inspection of the crash site, the rangers would locate 53-year-old RM's body still within the aircraft's cockpit. However, they also noticed that RB had seemingly managed to survive the impact, and subsequently located his body a decent distance away from the plane. As they approached his body, they located his jacket discarded on the ground a short distance away from him, and were initially perplexed as to why the man had seemingly discarded his jacket at the top of a mountain in January. However, they subsequently noticed that the location of his body was just 40 yards away from the crater's steam vents, which, then did actually offer a reasonable explanation as to why he'd removed his coat, and his death was ultimately chalked up to be a case of unfortunate happenstance, as seemingly, while he had been trying to make his way across the summit crater, steam had vented from inside the volcano, which essentially cooked him alive with the volcanic steam. However, this deadly collision would not be the last nor deadliest plane crash on Mount Rainier slopes that very same year. A few months later, on July 3rd, 1990, at just before 1 p.m. that afternoon, a Cessna 210 with 6 people aboard, which included the plane's pilot as well as 5 rodeo cowboys, traveled along the flight path of their chartered flight, which was slated to transport the cowboys from the city of Aurora in the state of Oregon to the city of Ponoka in the province of Alberta. As the Cessna 210 approached Mount Rainier, the pilot would apparently attempt to make radio contact with air traffic controllers. However, immediately following this, the plane would abruptly vanish from ATC radars, and they were unable to re-establish contact with the Cessna. Unfortunately, the cause of this was that the Cessna had slammed into Mount Rainier's southern slopes at an approximate elevation of 12,200 feet, killing all 6 passengers aboard the aircraft on impact. After an extensive search of Mount Rainier's slopes was mounted by park rangers on the ground and assisted from the air by both planes and helicopters, they would manage to locate the crash site and made their way to it, where they would find all 6 victims of the crash deceased within the wreckage. What ultimately caused the Cessna 210 to suddenly slam into Mount Rainier remains unknown, as the cause of the crash was unable to be determined following an inspection of the crash site and of the wreckage of the plane. However, the cause of the crash is widely believed to be that the pilot had become distracted and potentially overwhelmed by trying to properly navigate the plane past the peak, while simultaneously attempting to communicate with Seattle Air Traffic Control for flight path alteration requests. Another alternate theory behind the crash is that the pilot flying the plane may have underestimated the strength of the wind drafts wafting above Mount Rainier slopes, which struck the plane and caused it to suddenly lose its lift, sending it plummeting into the ground rapidly and rather abruptly, in a manner not all too dissimilar from the deadly Yeti Airlines Flight 691 crash I covered in another video a few months back. Now, the next 2 incidents I'll be detailing in this video didn't occur on Mount Rainier per se. However, they did occur within the confines of the surrounding Mount Rainier National Park. At around 11 a.m. on the morning of October 24th, 2000, park rangers would receive a call from a hunter in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest region of the park, who informed them that he'd gotten into an altercation with another man who had approached him at his camp. The hunter further stated that the argument and animosity between them continued to escalate and ultimately resulted in the hunter shooting the other man with his .45 caliber handgun, killing him. After park rangers responded to the call, the hunter would lead them back to his camp, where they would find the deceased victim of the altercation. However, upon arriving at his camp, the hunter would provide park officials with some additional chilling details which he had initially failed to provide during his phone call that morning. He informed park officials that the encounter with the man at his camp had in fact not occurred that morning, as they had assumed, but rather he told them that the altercation had actually occurred at 6:30 p.m. the previous evening on October 23rd. He'd additionally state that after shooting and killing the man at his camp that evening, he spent the remainder of the evening at the camp with the man's lifeless remains, before heading to sleep for the night in his tent. After spending the night at the camp with the body, he would at last finally set off to contact park officials the following morning, and subsequently place the aforementioned phone call to park rangers. Park officials would then contact police, and the hunter was subsequently arrested and taken into custody and was subsequently charged with a count of homicide as a result of his actions. Curiously, despite my best efforts, I was unable to locate any follow-up information, such as the ultimate verdict of these charges. However, according to my YouTube analytics, a not insignificant number of my subscribers actually live in the Seattle area, so I suppose if you work in law enforcement or the Park Service in the area and happen to know anything about the eventual outcome of the incident, and of course are at liberty to share further details with me about it, please leave me a comment on this video or shoot me an email, and if I do receive any credible further information about it, I'll be sure to update you all in a future video. The final incident I'll be detailing in this video is perhaps the most unusual, and is certainly the most chaotic of them all. In the early morning hours of New Year's Day, January 1st, 2012, at around 3 a.m. that morning, a 24-year-old man and Iraq War veteran named Benjamin Colton Barnes would get into a verbal altercation over a firearm at a New Year's party being hosted in Skyway, Washington, which rapidly escalated from a verbal altercation to violence, as Benjamin would proceed to shoot and injure 4 people at the party, leaving 2 of them in critical condition. Benjamin would then subsequently pilfer equipment from his victims, including valuable, high-end weaponry, body armor, and other various articles of survival gear, before he fled into Mount Rainier State Park to seek refuge from any potential pursuers. Later that morning at 10:20 a.m., Benjamin's car was spotted by 2 park rangers as it zoomed through a tire chain checkpoint station at high speed, and one of the rangers stationed at the checkpoint, a 34-year-old woman named Margaret Anderson, would attempt to pull Benjamin over for his infraction. However, after he failed to yield to her after quite some distance, she subsequently decided to position her car to create a roadblock in an attempt to force him to come to a stop. However, as he approached her roadblock, Benjamin would suddenly make a U-turn and subsequently leapt from the interior of his vehicle, only a few feet from Margaret's car, brandishing a shotgun in his hands, and immediately began unloading rounds into Margaret's car, striking her with multiple shots, gravely wounding her and incapacitating her before she had even had the chance to open the door of her car. As a number of police cars arrived on the scene to provide Margaret backup, Benjamin would hunker down, leveraging both his and Margaret's cars for cover, as he repelled any attempted advances by police by firing at them with a long rifle, which unfortunately prevented them from reaching Margaret in time to potentially save her life, as she reportedly roughly clung to her life for approximately 90 minutes after being shot by Benjamin, before finally succumbing to her injuries. After he traded gunfire with police for at least 90 minutes, Benjamin would manage to slip away from police and into the nearby woods. After they realized that Benjamin had managed to escape from the police, the FBI would provide thermally equipped aircraft that were immediately deployed to search for him throughout the afternoon. However, by dusk, they were still unsuccessful in their efforts to locate any further trace of him. The FBI thermal aircraft would continue their search for Benjamin throughout the evening, as local park officials, Washington State Police, and SWAT officials formed a massive 200-person search party to hunt down Benjamin the following day, January 2nd. Despite their extensive searching throughout the night, the thermal aircraft had still failed to locate Benjamin, as he had managed to elude being detected by them by traveling through creeks and other waterways rather than through the deep snow in the area. However, sometime during the daylight hours of January 2nd, Benjamin would seemingly attempt to make his way through a section of chest-deep snow, but would ultimately die of exposure while he did so. Later that day, the FBI thermal aircraft spotted what appeared to be a body with no heat signature lying face down in the snow, and the police team would locate Benjamin Colton Barnes's lifeless remains in an area filled with chest-deep snow, bringing an end to his rampage. In the months following the incident, more details about Benjamin would emerge, as it was revealed he had been discharged from the military in the preceding months, and court documents from the previous year, in 2011, were also released to the public, stating that he was suicidal, easily irritated, angry, depressed, and possibly suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and was in possession of a large arsenal of firearms as well. Thank you all for watching.